You just ruined my dress.
The perfect evening. The magnificent Crystal Crown Hotel sparkled beneath thousands of golden lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Celebrities, politicians, business executives, and some of the richest people in the country stepped onto the red carpet. Inside, hundreds of guests admired the breathtaking ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers, fresh white roses, and elegant gold accents. Tonight wasn't just another gala. It was the annual charity dinner hosted by billionaire businessman Richard Hart, one of the country's most respected hotel owners. Every major television network was covering the event. Every important guest wanted to be seen there. Hidden behind all the luxury, working quietly among the guests, was a young waiter named Daniel Brooks, 24 years old, kind, hardworking, always smiling. Daniel had spent the last 4 years serving tables inside the Crystal Crown Hotel. His coworkers loved him. Customers often complimented his politeness. But no one knew what happened after his shift ended. Every night, Daniel returned home to care for his sick mother. She had been battling kidney disease for 3 years. Medical bills kept piling up. Daniel worked double shifts almost every day just to afford her treatment. He had given up university. He had given up vacations. He had even sold his late father's watch. Not because he wanted luxury, but because he refused to let his mother lose hope. Still, he never complained. Every morning before leaving for work, his mother would smile weakly and say, "One day your kindness will open a door that money never could." Daniel always laughed. "Mom, kindness doesn't pay rent." She would simply smile. "You'll see." Back at the hotel, the ballroom buzzed with excitement. Managers hurried from table to table, making sure every detail was perfect. Daniel carefully arranged champagne glasses before his supervisor approached him. "Daniel." "Yes, sir." "The owner's daughter will be attending tonight. I heard. Whatever happens, make sure her table receives perfect service." Daniel nodded politely. "I understand." The manager leaned closer. "And don't upset her." Daniel frowned. "Why would I?" The manager sighed. "Because Miss Isabella Hart isn't exactly known for patience." Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Everyone in the hotel knew the stories. Luxury designer clothes, private jets, bodyguards, and a terrible temper. Some employees had been fired after the smallest mistakes. Daniel simply smiled. "I'm sure everything will be fine." At exactly 7 o'clock, a black limousine stopped outside the hotel. The crowd turned. Cameras flashed. The hotel's grand entrance doors opened. Out stepped Isabella Hart, 26 years old. Beautiful, elegant, confident. She wore an emerald green designer gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Diamond earrings sparkled with every step. She barely acknowledged the photographers. Instead, she walked inside as though the entire building existed for her alone. Employees immediately stood straighter. Guests whispered, "That's Richard Hart's daughter. They say she'll inherit the entire company. I've heard she's brilliant." Another guest quietly replied, "I've heard something else. She's impossible to please." Daniel watched from across the ballroom. He smiled politely like he did with every guest. He had no idea that before the night ended, one moment, one mistake, would change both their lives forever. Drop your country and city in the comments below. I love seeing where our Chamber Tales family is growing around the world. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists, powerful life lessons, and unforgettable endings, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Now, let's begin. The ballroom buzzed with laughter, soft music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Guests admired the elegant decorations as waiters moved gracefully between tables, making sure every guest was comfortable. Daniel glanced at his watch. Everything was going smoothly. His supervisor smiled from across the room and gave him a thumbs up. "Keep it up." Daniel smiled back. Maybe tonight won't be so difficult after all. He couldn't have been more wrong. At the VIP table, Isabella Hart sat surrounded by celebrities, politicians, and influential business leaders. Every few minutes, someone walked over to greet her. She accepted compliments with a confident smile, but rarely looked anyone in the eye. To her, everyone around her existed to serve her. She snapped her fingers. A nearby waiter hurried over. "My champagne is warm." "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll replace it immediately. And tell your manager to train his staff better." "Yes, ma'am." The waiter walked away, embarrassed. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One elderly woman whispered to her husband, "Money can buy luxury, but it can never buy kindness." Meanwhile, Daniel collected a fresh tray of sparkling drinks. He carefully balanced the glasses as he walked toward the VIP section. The ballroom had become crowded. Guests moved in every direction. A photographer suddenly stepped backward without looking. Daniel avoided crashing into him. But as he turned, one glass tipped slightly. A few drops of sparkling juice landed on Isabella's designer gown. Silence. Daniel froze. His heart sank. I'm so sorry, Miss Hart." He quickly reached for a clean napkin. "It was an accident. Please allow me to." Before he could finish, slap. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Daniel staggered backward. The tray crashed onto the marble floor. Glasses shattered everywhere. The music stopped. Every conversation ended instantly. Hundreds of guests turned toward them. Daniel slowly lifted a hand to his burning cheek. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Isabella's eyes burned with anger. "Do you have any idea how much this dress cost?" Daniel lowered his head.
You
"I'm
just
truly
ruined
sorry,
my
ma'am.
dress.
You ruined it. It was an accident." "Accident?" She laughed coldly. "People like you always hide behind that word." Daniel remained silent. "I'll pay for the cleaning." She scoffed. You couldn't afford the zipper on this dress." A ripple of uncomfortable whispers spread across the room. Some guests looked away. Others secretly pulled out their phones and began recording. A little girl standing beside her mother whispered, "Mom, why did she hit him?" Her mother sighed. "Because some people think money gives them the right to hurt others." Isabella pointed directly at Daniel. "I want him fired. Immediately. If he still works here tomorrow, I'll make sure this hotel regrets it." Daniel looked down at the broken glass scattered across the floor. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply knelt down and began picking up the shattered pieces with his bare hands. One sharp shard sliced across his palm. Blood slowly dripped onto the polished marble floor. Still, he said nothing. A fellow waitress rushed over. "Daniel, stop. You're bleeding." He quietly replied, "It's okay. I'll clean it." The room grew painfully silent. No one knew what to do. The hotel manager hurried over, sweat forming on his forehead. "Miss Hart, please calm down." "Calm down." She turned toward him. "You employ people who ruin expensive property." The manager swallowed hard. "I'll handle this." "You'd better." She folded her arms confidently. "I expect him to be fired before this event is over." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about his mother, her medication, the hospital bills. If he lost this job, he had no idea what they would do. Then, the grand ballroom doors slowly opened. Every head turned. The room fell completely silent. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Someone important had arrived. And within seconds, the entire night was about to change forever. The grand ballroom doors swung open. Every conversation stopped. The clicking of camera shutters faded into silence. A tall man in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo walked confidently into the room. His silver hair reflected the glow of the crystal chandeliers. His calm expression commanded respect without a single word. It was Richard Hart, founder of the Crystal Crown Hotel Group, one of the country's most respected billionaires. The man whose business empire had been built over 4 decades. Employees immediately stood at attention. Guests smiled nervously. Even politicians straightened their jackets. Richard noticed the broken glasses on the floor. He noticed the frightened expressions on the faces of his staff. Then, his eyes stopped on Daniel. The young waiter was still kneeling on the marble floor. Blood slowly dripped from his hand as he picked up the broken pieces of glass. Richard frowned. What happened here? No one answered. The silence grew heavier. Finally, Isabella stepped forward. "Dad, this waiter ruined my dress. He spilled juice on me." Richard looked at her. Then he looked back at Daniel. "Is that true?" Daniel stood up slowly. His hand was still bleeding. "Yes, sir. It was an accident. I sincerely apologize." Richard nodded quietly. Then he asked the question no one expected. "Did you slap him?" The ballroom froze. Isabella hesitated. He deserved to be taught a lesson. Richard's face became expressionless. "I asked you a question. Did you slap him?" After several seconds, she finally answered, "Yes." But before she could continue, Richard raised his hand. "Enough." The room became so quiet that even the sound of a falling spoon echoed across the ballroom. Richard walked toward Daniel. Every guest expected the billionaire to fire him. Some even looked away, unable to watch. Richard stopped directly in front of Daniel. He looked at the cut on the young man's hand. Then he did something no one expected. He removed his white pocket handkerchief, carefully wrapped it around Daniel's bleeding hand, and said quietly, "I'm sorry." Daniel looked confused. "Sir." Richard shook his head. "I'm not apologizing because of the spilled drink. I'm apologizing because you were treated with disrespect inside my hotel." Gasps spread through the ballroom. Even the hotel manager looked stunned. Richard turned to the guests. "In this hotel, we may serve food. We may serve drinks. But we never serve humiliation." Several guests began applauding softly. Richard faced his daughter. His voice remained calm. "Isabella, you embarrassed an innocent man. You embarrassed every employee who works honestly. And most of all, you embarrassed this family. Dad, No, you will listen. When your grandfather started this business, he cleaned tables himself. I carried luggage before I ever stepped into an office. We built this company by respecting people, not by looking down on them." Isabella's confident smile disappeared. For the first time that night, she looked frightened. Richard reached into his jacket
You
and removed a
humiliated
small
an innocent
envelope.
man.
He
You're
handed
suspended.
it to her. She opened
Dad,
it. Her face
please.
turned pale.
I'm
"What is this?"
sorry.
"Your suspension. You are no longer executive director of Crystal Crown Hotels." The ballroom erupted in whispers. What? Did he just suspend his own daughter? This can't be real. Isabella stared at her father. "You can't do this. I've worked for this company." Richard replied firmly. "No. You inherited a position. You haven't earned it." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. Guests who had admired her only moments before now looked at her with disappointment. Richard wasn't finished. "Starting tomorrow morning, you will report to the hotel manager as a trainee waitress. For 6 months. No executive office. No chauffeur. No company credit cards. No special treatment. You will earn every meal. Exactly the way Daniel does." The ballroom exploded into stunned silence. One businessman whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Another quietly replied, "That's why he's respected." Richard turned back to Daniel. "Young man." Daniel looked up nervously. "Yes, sir." Richard smiled for the first time that evening. "I have a feeling this won't be your last promotion." Daniel didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. "Thank you, sir." Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Because over the next 6 months, both Daniel and Isabella would learn lessons that would change their lives forever. The next morning, at exactly 6:30 a.m., Isabella Hart stood outside the employee entrance of the Crystal Crown Hotel. For the first time in her life, no luxury car waited for her. No bodyguards surrounded her. No photographers asked for pictures. She wore a simple hotel uniform. Her expensive jewelry was gone. Her designer handbag had been replaced with a small employee locker. As she walked through the staff entrance, whispers followed her. "Is that really Miss Hart? I can't believe she's wearing our uniform. Yesterday, she was giving orders. Today, she's taking them." Isabella lowered her head. The whispers stung more than she expected. The hotel manager, Mr. Collins, approached her with a clipboard. "Good morning." She forced a smile. "Good morning." He handed her a name tag. It simply read, "Isabella, trainee waiter." She stared at it in disbelief. "No special title?" Mr. Collins looked at her calmly. "Not anymore. You'll earn one if you deserve it." Meanwhile, Daniel arrived for work. His hand was still bandaged. When he saw Isabella in uniform, he stopped walking. For a brief moment, their eyes met. She looked away. Ashamed, Daniel said nothing. He simply walked past her and clocked in. Training began immediately. Mr. Collins placed a heavy tray filled with glasses into Isabella's hands. "Take these to table 7. She rolled her eyes. "That's easy." She had barely taken 5 steps before the tray tilted. Glasses crashed onto the floor. Crash. Every employee turned to look. The sound echoed through the restaurant. Isabella froze. Her face turned bright red. She expected someone to yell at her. Instead, Daniel quietly walked over. "It's okay. I'll help you." Without saying another word, he knelt down and helped her clean the broken glass. She looked at him in shock. "After everything I did, why are you helping me?" Daniel smiled gently. "Because someone once helped me when I made my first mistake." His kindness made her feel even worse. By lunchtime, reality had set in. Customers snapped their fingers at her. One man complained his coffee wasn't hot enough. Another demanded fresh bread. A woman returned her meal 3 times. By evening, her feet ached. Her hands hurt. She had never worked this hard in her entire life. She collapsed into a chair during her break. Quietly, she whispered to herself, "How do they do this every single day?" The following week became even harder. One afternoon, a wealthy customer accidentally knocked a glass onto Isabella's uniform. Juice splashed across her shirt. The restaurant fell silent. For a split second, she expected an apology. Instead, the customer shouted, "Watch where you're standing." Her heart sank. For the first time, she wasn't the powerful executive. She was simply another employee. She remembered Daniel's face. The humiliation, the slap, the silence. Tears filled her eyes. She finally understood. Not because someone explained it to her, but because she had lived it herself. That evening, she found Daniel preparing tables for the next day's breakfast. She walked toward him slowly. "Daniel." He looked up. "Yes." She struggled to find the words. I'm sorry." He remained silent. She continued, "I thought money made me important. I thought people existed to serve me. I was wrong." Daniel smiled softly. "The hardest lessons are usually the ones we never wanted to learn." She nodded. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't expect you to forgive me." Daniel looked at her kindly. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once. It's something you earn through your actions." His words stayed with her long after he walked away. High above the restaurant, Richard Hart watched everything through the office window. He saw his daughter carrying trays. He saw her cleaning tables. He saw her apologizing to customers. Most importantly, he saw something he had never seen before: humility. Richard smiled quietly. "This is the daughter I hoped to raise." But neither of them knew. Their greatest test was still to come, because one unexpected guest was about to walk into the hotel and force Isabella to prove whether she had truly changed. 3 months passed. The transformation in Isabella Hart was impossible to ignore. The once proud billionaire's daughter now arrived before sunrise. She greeted every employee by name. She carried heavy trays without complaining. She thanked the kitchen staff after every shift. And whenever a new employee made a mistake, she was the first to say, "Don't worry, I've been there too." The staff couldn't believe she was the same woman who had slapped Daniel in front of hundreds of people. Even Daniel noticed the change. She no longer walked with arrogance. She walked with humility. But Richard Hart wasn't interested in words. He wanted proof. Because anyone could pretend to change. The real test came when no one was watching. One Friday evening, the hotel was completely booked. Every table was full. The kitchen was overwhelmed. Waiters rushed in every direction. The atmosphere was tense. Suddenly, an elderly woman wearing old, faded clothes slowly walked into the restaurant. Her shoes were worn out. Her handbag was torn. She looked tired and hungry. The room immediately became uncomfortable. Several wealthy guests stared at her. One whispered, "She must be in the wrong place." Another laughed, "Can she even afford a bottle of water here?" The elderly woman quietly approached the hostess. "Excuse me, may I have something inexpensive to eat?" Before the hostess could answer, a businessman standing nearby frowned. "This is a 5-star hotel. People like her shouldn't be here." Several guests nodded in agreement. The woman lowered her head. "I'm sorry, I'll leave." Just as she turned around, a familiar voice stopped her. "You don't have to leave." It was Isabella. She walked over with a warm smile. "You are our guest, and every guest deserves respect." The businessman scoffed. "Miss, do you even know who she is?" "No, and I don't need to." She gently pulled out a chair. "Please, have a seat." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. "No one has treated me this kindly in years." Isabella smiled. "What would you like to eat?" The woman looked at the menu nervously. "I only have enough for soup." Isabella closed the menu. "Tonight, dinner is on the house." The businessman slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're giving charity inside a luxury hotel?" Before Isabella could answer, Daniel stepped forward. He stood beside her. "We don't measure people by their clothes. We measure them by their character." The restaurant became silent. Guests watched every moment. Some looked embarrassed. Others smiled. The elderly woman quietly wiped away her tears. "I've spent years believing the world had forgotten people like me." Daniel replied softly. "It hasn't. Not while we're here." High above the restaurant, Richard Hart watched everything unfold on the security monitors. He hadn't told anyone. But the elderly woman wasn't a random customer. She was his retired schoolteacher. The woman who had once given him free lunches when his own family couldn't afford food. Richard had asked her to visit the hotel without revealing who she was. He wanted to know whether his daughter had truly changed, or whether she was only pretending because of her punishment. As he watched Isabella serve the woman with genuine kindness, a proud smile spread across his face. He whispered to himself, "Now you understand what true wealth really means." But fate wasn't finished. As the elderly woman prepared to leave, she suddenly collapsed to the floor. The entire restaurant erupted in panic. Guests screamed. Chairs scraped across the floor. Without hesitation, Daniel rushed to her side. Isabella knelt beside him. "Call an ambulance." Daniel gently held the woman's hand. "Stay with us." Richard came running downstairs. For a terrifying moment, no one knew if she would survive. And in those tense seconds, Isabella realized something she had never understood before. Money could buy almost anything, but it could never replace a human life. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics rushed into the restaurant as frightened guests stepped aside. Daniel stayed beside the elderly woman, holding her hand. "It's okay, ma'am. Help is here." Isabella gently wiped the tears from the woman's face. "You'll be all right." The paramedics carefully placed her on a stretcher. Just before they wheeled her away, she reached for Isabella's hand. With a weak smile, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Those simple words pierced Isabella's heart. She stood there silently as the ambulance disappeared into the night. The next morning, Richard Hart called an emergency meeting. Every employee gathered inside the ballroom. The same ballroom where Isabella had humiliated Daniel months earlier. The atmosphere was tense. No one knew why they had been summoned. Richard walked onto the stage. Beside him stood Isabella. And Daniel. He looked around the room before speaking. 3 months ago, my daughter believed wealth was measured by power. Yesterday, she proved that true wealth is measured by compassion. The room became silent. Richard continued. The elderly woman who visited us yesterday wasn't there by accident. Guests exchanged puzzled looks. Richard smiled. She was Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, my former schoolteacher. When I was 12 years old, my father lost his job. My family had no money. I often came to school hungry. He paused. Mrs. Brooks noticed. Without telling anyone, she paid for my lunch every single day. I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for her kindness. Many employees wiped away tears. Richard looked at Isabella. I asked her to visit this hotel because I wanted to know whether my daughter had truly changed. He smiled proudly. Yesterday, she gave me my answer. The ballroom erupted into applause. Richard turned toward Daniel. There is someone else who deserves recognition. Daniel looked surprised. Richard walked over and shook his hand. When my daughter humiliated you, you chose forgiveness instead of revenge. You taught her more than I ever could. He handed Daniel a small envelope. Daniel opened it slowly. His hands began to shake. Inside was a letter. Promotion notice. Assistant hotel manager. His eyes filled with tears. Sir, I don't know what to say. Richard smiled. You already said it. Every day, through your actions. The employees burst into applause again. Several rushed over to congratulate him. Richard then faced Isabella. Your 6-month training isn't over. She nodded respectfully. I understand. But, he smiled. You've earned back something much more valuable than your position. She looked confused. My trust. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She hugged her father tightly. I'm sorry. For everything. Richard embraced her. I'm proud of the woman you've become. 6 months later, the Crystal Crown Hotel held another charity gala. The ballroom looked just as beautiful as before. But this time, something was different. At the entrance, guests were welcomed by Isabella herself. She greeted every employee with a smile. She thanked every waiter personally. When a young server accidentally spilled a few drops of coffee on her sleeve, the room froze. The young waiter trembled. I'm so sorry. Isabella smiled warmly. It's all right. It was an accident. She picked up a napkin and helped him clean the spill. Daniel watched from across the room and smiled. Richard quietly nodded with pride. The lesson had finally been learned. Narrator's closing message. Never judge a person's value by the clothes they wear, the job they do, or the money they have. Because kindness costs nothing, but its value can change someone's life forever. Respect is the greatest wealth anyone can possess. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that character is more valuable than money.